Happy Friday. There's a lot of news here happening in Cape Ann, leading out of New Year's Eve and into the new year. I think a topic and a story that everybody, both in Gloucester and across the nation, across the globe, have been talking about are the riots that happened on Capitol Hill last Wednesday. Now, as the nation's elected officials were in the midst of confirming Joe Biden as the winner of the presidential election last Wednesday, a violent mob seeking to keep President Trump in the White House stormed the Capitol Hill, and as we've seen from constant news coverage and video footage, those riders went in not only to the Hill, but also into the building, into different offices, and trying to reach those who, are in the process of electing Joe Biden as president-elect for the 2021 election season. Now, as all this is happening, we're seeing photos of people in animal clothing, people holding Trump signs, people, talking on social media about their perspective of what happened, how this reflects both the past, the present, and what our nation will expect in the future. And so after the riots happened on Wednesday, we here at the Gloucester Daily Times went out and just talked to a few people here in the city to kind of see their perspective on what happened and what they see kind of as the next step. And so I had the opportunity to speak with Bruce Tarr, and just him, and able to speak with Mark Nestor, and they both in agreement said, that they condemn the violence and that this is not something that they ever want to see again, and it's something that they truly are disappointed to see how people have gone about trying to get their voice heard and their perspective heard on this year's election. Now, two voices that I was really particularly interested to hear the perspective of is a young girl who has led a couple peaceful protests here in the city in the past, Jada Exama. She is part of the youth peace movement here in the city. And if you guys remember, Black Lives Matter was a big discussion point this summer, as we continued to hear conversations about those who were killed due to race, and those who were seeking racial justice, and how that manifests itself, especially here in Gloucester. It was very peaceful, it was very collaborative, and I want to say that I think that that is truly due to the collaboration and I think respectful nature of these young men and women who went about doing different types of protests. And so I spoke with Jada over the phone, and she talked about how she was speechless, how the past 2 days since the riots happened, her classes, that's all they've been talking about. That's how they relate to their learning. Kind of their teachers gave them space to process, to talk about all the things that were happening, and kind of what it means for her as somebody who, is seeking change, is seeking conducive and constructive conversations, both here and throughout the nation. Jada was saying just how it brings her concern going to the future as a young adult, and how she sees that now anyone who wants to speak their mind, or wants to bring up different points, that might be brought against them in violence. And she's really concerned, that these riders who were protesting in favor of President Trump really took, in her perspective, the wrong turn, and really made the future of activists fearful of how different conversations might be chosen, as she wants to see protests in peace and opportunity to have constructive dialogue. And she feels as if that the conversations, there was no conversation that Wednesday. It was truly violence and malicious intent. And so Jada was one person, but I also was able to speak with Ashley Sullivan, and she brings a really interesting point of view to the conversation. She's the Gloucester Republican City Committee chairwoman. She was elected about a year ago. And I quote, "The GRCC unequivocally condemns the violence perpetrated yesterday at our nation's capital. The violence from either side of the political spectrum is unacceptable. We've called it out continuously for the past 4 years, and we will continue to call it out no matter who the perpetrator are and what side of the aisle they fall on. There's absolutely no excusing their behavior, and as I said before, we absolutely condemn violence of any sort. But it's easy to see why the most vulnerable and weak-minded of the population would act in such a desperate manner." Ashley Sullivan went on to say that the same population had experienced being violently attacked for their stickers on their car, had property vandalized, and being censored online. And she goes, again, quote, "They legitimately believe the election was fraudulent and they're not alone." Now that quote and those conversations from the GRCC, I think, spurred on a lot of conversations online about different viewpoints about how a lot of Republicans are condemning the acts that happened on last Wednesday, but are also noting that these people feel as if they've also been attacked. So it's a point of view that's very interesting, and one that's here in the city. And so that's kind of the pulse of the past voter and present participant within our community.
Gotcha. Nice work. Taylor, there's some new news this week regarding the gun range over in West Gloucester.
Yeah, so Tuesday was a big day here in the city. I mean, lots of different meetings happening, and one of those was a public hearing that took place over Zoom. Now, this public hearing was kind of the response of the community had come together in West Gloucester to petition a shooting range that was happening over in West Gloucester, behind Haskell Pond, down Forest Lane by what's also known as Red Rocks Conservation Area. It's a place that people often hike and bike, and we have mass mudders. People go birding, bring their dogs over there. And last April, an ordinance change had occurred to reopen the shooting range. It had been closed in 2009 due to misuse and other agencies coming into the city and using the space. So it had been closed last April. This new ordinance opened it up with new regulations, but the community felt as if there wasn't a lot of community dialogue or conversations with the city administrators about the firing range, the shooting range, as it was in their back. And so what happened was that the reason why there wasn't a lot of discussion, the city had said, is that because it affects the entire city, they don't have to send out flyers, or those notifications to each doorstep, because it is a full city. It impacts the full city. But the abutters, there are about 300 neighbors in West Gloucester, were saying that they're willing to move. The noise is so bad, that the danger is so prevalent there in their city, and they want to have this dialogue. So they signed a petition, they got the numbers, and this public hearing took place on Tuesday. And residents really spoke up. Nubar Alexanian has lived in Gloucester most of his life, and he was talking about how he's considering moving out of Gloucester if the shooting range stays around, just because the noise is so bad, and it feels as if it's bringing an unwelcomed environment to their otherwise pretty peaceful area. Other bikers and hikers are speaking about how their children are upset, or dogs are kind of getting frightened. Those who have PTSD, it's triggering a lot for them. People's house value is going down, also with the reinstatement of the shooting range. So there's a lot of concern. I think it's mainly to do about safety and about the comfort of those who frequent the trails over there. If anyone knows that area, the trails go right through the shooting range or right around it. And there was a big concern that, people who come in from outside might not know that there's a shooting range. It might be a little bit jolted by the fact that there is one. And so there's over 20 people who spoke in opposition. And then Chief Conley was able to come on and kind of reiterate what he had said at a community meeting back in August about the shooting range, and just how the importance of having a localized shooting range is for the police department. It saves them over $50,000, which they would be spending to travel to Fort Devens. And so it's this tricky thing of, it is cost effective to have a shooting range in your backyard, but also what does that mean for the neighbors and the residents who have been living there? And so the conversation continues, and we have full details of what happened in our newspaper. You guys can go to GloucesterDailyTimes.com for more information about that. But just to know that this conversation is still continuing. The Open Space Committee noted that they're going to be talking about this at their next meeting. And if a city councilor wants to change the ordinance to kind of appease the residents over in West Gloucester, that they can reach out to the city clerk with a request. So that conversation, I'm sure, is still ongoing. But it's one that affects everybody here in the city, and everyone noted, while there are differences, everyone wants the police department trained. They all really respect the fact that they need their training done, but it's just a matter of where and when.
Taylor, I thought it was really interesting that you pointed out in your article that Chief Conley has already been through this discussion when he was the police chief in Manchester. He faced the same issue, right?
Yeah, and a big thing he noted there was how he gave them their word in Manchester, his word in Manchester, that things would be a certain way, and he said things have stayed that way since. And so I think that people are really banking on that idea of trust, but I think they're also noting that people are in certain positions for only a certain amount of time, and so what will happen whenever Conley moves on or retires or whenever that might be, does that word stay, as the ordinance is phrased a little bit differently or not as personable as Conley is. So
Right.
Gotcha. Taylor, what about potential swing spaces while the new Veterans Memorial School or the new school consolidation construction begins?
Right. I feel like we've been talking about this combined school forever since I started with the paper. And, it is a new topic within the series, I feel like, that we have had over the past month. And this one is about the swing space for veterans, students, and staff. Now, as we all know, the new East Gloucester Veterans Combined School that got passed by the city in November, that new building is going to be on Webster Street at the site of Veterans and Mados Field. So the question is, for the next 2 years while that school is being built, where are those students to go? And that is the question that the school committee got closer to this Tuesday, which is either St. Anne's, which is St. Anne's School, which is where they've had swing space before, or Pathways for Children, that does work with children, and it's a nonprofit and has children in that space and learning environment all the time. And so Tuesday morning, a subcommittee met to talk about these two options. Pathways has offered a rent of $20,000 a month, while the Archdiocese of Boston has put the use of St. Anne's facility at $19,000 a month. Now, any additional space will cost more. And so they're taking that, but they're also, I think, more than the budget, really looking at the amenities and looking at what is going to be the most conducive learning environment for the children and for the teachers. There was a lot of talk on Tuesday about the drawbacks of Pathways. I think that's at least what I got out of the conversation from hearing from them, is while they appreciate Pathways so much and about the fact that they're willing to give their space up, there was a conversation about the bathrooms and how there's only 2 bathrooms for an entire school, how they'd be sharing the space, and also just the lack of parking and how they might have to park at Gloucester High School. What would transportation look like? Just a lot of factors that I think would make things even more overwhelming to the moving process in the midst of the pandemic, with all different points of view. On the flip side, St. Anne's, they talked about, this space has been used before for swing space with West Parish. And so seeing that as a positive, seeing that they've already put the money in, that it is actually centrally located for the Veterans School District. And so that's a huge plus as well. And so this conversation is to continue. The school committee will make their recommendation on January 27th. And so while it is, a few weeks away, it seems like things are picking up as we continue to see this process within seeing a new school in a couple of years.
And lastly, Taylor, the first round of vaccinations.
Right. Yeah. So vaccines, we've been talking and awaiting them for quite a while now. We know that, nursing homes and long-term care facilities have already got their vaccines here in the city. But the city did open up a vaccine clinic over at Rose Baker Senior Center for first responders. And that first day of the clinic happened on Tuesday. And Karen Carroll, the public health director, noted that, they gave 100 doses of the Moderna vaccine, or 100 people got the vaccine, and it went as perfectly as she expected. She was really proud of the people that went there to volunteer and help out, and just said that no dose was wasted. There was 2 cancellations, and through their system that they had created, they were able to, find 2 replacements to come and get the vaccine that day. And so they were able to use up all the 100 vaccines that they had, and that they will be giving 500 doses this week. And then they will contact the state saying how much more they'll need next week. She says it's a week-by-week process. And that way, just to ensure that they don't waste any vaccine and they're able to kind of distribute it as they need. And it's really interesting to hear just the process in which they make sure that they don't waste anything, but also that they align with the governor's orders of the phases and making sure that they're giving the vaccine out to the people within the particular phases and not skipping anybody and not giving them just to random people, just making sure that they really comply with CDC and Governor Baker's orders.
Gotcha.
Great to know.
Great work all around, Taylor. We will catch you next week.
All right.
Thank you, Taylor. Bye.